Howdy. I'm going to explain all the controls for helicopters for use in Sim, and I'm going to use my control scheme as an example to do so. Hopefully this helps some people out who want to get into helicopters but don't know exactly how to use them because War Thunder implements them in ways that most video games don't, or at least not by default. So we'll just cut to the chase. The first thing you'll want to do is go to Options, Helicopter Battle Settings, and turn this off, or set to mouse aim mode only, just one of these two settings. And if you're using VR, turn this off. I think it'll be on by default, I don't remember, but make sure it says no, because it is a terribly implemented setting. It sucks. It sounds cool, but Gaijin did not implement it well. And I primarily use a VR headset, but this control scheme that I use is workable without a VR headset. I do have camera controls to, look around and still fly with just the controller, but I recommend using a VR headset. It's way better, and I gotta go kill this thing. I forgot this is going to annoy the shit out of me if I just let it beep and boop for the rest of this. Okay. So, the very first thing you're gonna want to do when you open up your controls is set it to simplified controls, scroll all the way down to Instructor, and turn these off. And then turn off Virtual Instructor. Now, this is a bug that happens with my game. I don't know if it happens to y'all's, but I have to go into my settings multiple times and change my controls. I have to do this 3 times. As you can see, I just changed those settings again, and I'm having to do them a third. Never mind, only a second time. Really, only need 2 times? Okay, well, anyways, you might have to do it a couple times. I have to do that, but once it's done, not changing your controls, it'll be fine. So once you do that, go to full real controls. That way you have access to all the controls. And I guess real quickly, I'll explain why you don't want Virtual Instructor on. So these really the only setting you want to disable, or you need to, is this one. These are not really that important. Those don't matter. This one, I don't really know exactly what that does, but I'll show you what that top setting does and why I hate it and why you should hate it too. So what that top setting does, it restricts your control when you're close to the ground. Auto restrict control of the aircraft near the ground. So if I try to tilt my helicopter all the way forward right now, it won't let me. You see how my helicopter is bouncing up and down? That's because the instructor is not letting me fly my helicopter when I'm close to the ground. And this is bad for a couple reasons, and I'll show you right here. You can see I'm flying like straight at these trees, and I'm like, oh shit, I need to turn, but it's not letting me turn enough, and I crash into the ground like that. That's why you do not want this setting on. So hopefully I have hit that in enough. Ah shit, I forgot that fucking thing's back up. I'm gonna kill it. Okay. So turn off Virtual Instructor and not just turning it off is not enough. I forgot to mention this. Turning it off is not enough. You can see I'll turn these back on, and I'll go to full real controls. You see how it says it's not on. And I try to fly, and okay, it did not do this last time. It did not. I swear to God. Let's try this again. Now see, it's doing it. It's doing it. It's bouncing up and down. Like, it's not letting me turn my helicopter enough. So you have to turn all those settings off and then turn off Virtual Instructor. It took me like a whole year to find out why. I thought that was just a permanent thing that your helicopter always did. I didn't realize that you had to turn off the settings here, not just up here. So hopefully that helps one of y'all out, because I was in that position where I was flying like this for a year, didn't realize I could turn that off, and someone told me about that and changed my life. So toggle controls mode is not something you really need, but if you're flying Hueys and other helicopters that do not have an SAS toggling mode, or I guess does not have an auto trim mode that you can go to, which I'll explain in a bit, then you might want to have that binded to something. I have it set to numpad enter, since that is the closest button to my mouse, because it's on the right side of my keyboard, and I'm right-handed. And then toggle SAS mode is that thing I was talking about. It's only available in full real controls for sim. You can still be in full real controls in other realistic and arcade, but you're locked with you can't go to these in sim. You're stuck with full real controls. So you need to have this binded to something if you're gonna play ground sim with helicopters. So what it does is your helicopter has technically 5 different SAS modes or stability augmentation system modes. It default will start your helicopter off at the beginning of every battle with manual control, which, as you can see, makes your helicopter a little drunk. And that's really all it does. Is it basically turns off auto trim for your helicopter. And this is what it looks like when you don't touch your helicopter's controls and let it just fly in manual control by itself. It's very hard to shoot straight. So if you press the SAS toggle button, it'll go straight to dampening, which is basically auto trim on. Now I should note that the Hueys do not have a dampening mode, or at least they do, but it's not really dampening. It's called co-pilot auto. It's a hovering mode basically, and it's weird, but it's not dampening, it's hovering. Then you have automatic leveling, which makes your helicopter basically flat, makes it to where, if you try to point your nose forward, it raises it back up, but it does not cause you to hover. Then you have hovering, which is kind of sort of like automatic leveling, but it locks your helicopter in 3D space. You can still move around, but it's a lot, your controls are a lot stiffer, it doesn't let you move around that much, and as soon as you stop letting go, as soon as you let go of the controls, it goes back to hovering. You can control your, you can't see it, but on the HUD you can see, in fact I probably should have explained the HUD. Oh, that's cool. I never knew they added that vortex ring thing. Huh. Must be a new feature. What? Show cursor, here we go. Is that what I'm looking for? I'm looking for the mouse thing, sorry. I'm trying to point at stuff with my mouse, but... Okay, here we go. So you can see over here, this is your elevation from the ground, and this is not like plane altitude. This is like, this gives you an exact measurement to the ground floor directly below you. This is how fast you are climbing. This is your RPM of the rotor blades up top, which is a very important number. This is your collective, your helicopter's collective. What that is the angle of the blades, which affects how much thrust your chopper blades have. This is your speed in any given direction, and cannon ammo, rocket ammo, ATGMs, anti-air missiles, flares, fire rate, fuel. That's all self-explanatory. You can see here, it's all this stuff is kind of sort of repeated up here. That's your rocket indicator. That's how you aim with rockets. But in VR, this specific kind of HUD is broken, and like this is not. It doesn't properly display where your rockets are going to land. I can't really show you here because this is not VR. But anyways, collective pitch. That affects this thing right here. Collective pitch, again, is the angle of the blades. It's the angle of these right here. And the higher that angle, the more thrust you have upwards of your helicopter. Another thing I should mention is with manual control off, your helicopter is a little bit more agile. You can see I can like turn this thing a lot faster. And if I wasn't dampening, you can see it's not as fast. So if you want to make a very quick turn, you can very, very quickly switch to manual control and then go back to dampening. But it's easier to do on helicopters that only have one setting, whereas this one you have to press the button like 4 times to get to it. Anyways, so you got collective pitch. That one's pretty self-explanatory. You can set this to... why is this not letting me change the... Oh, there we go. Okay. You can set this to a joystick, although I don't have it set to a joystick because I kept having this problem where it would like... the input would go straight to 0, and it was really dumb. I have a video showing exactly what I mean. But if you don't have, if you can just do this, left stick up, left stick down if you're using an Xbox controller, or W and S. However you want to fly your helicopter, although I recommend you don't use binary input because that makes it a lot harder to use minimal adjustments. Like you can't, with the, I mean, for the collective pitch it doesn't matter, but for roll access it does. Like if I only had binary input, it would either be at 0 or 1. Like these are the only options. But if you have a joystick, you can use, you can make much more fine-tuned adjustments. But collective, you don't really need that. You don't need to adjust your collective because it's relative control anyways. Which you want to make sure to set it to relative control. Dead zone, I set pretty high so that I can use my... Okay, hold up. This thing's annoying the shit out of me. I'm sure it's annoying y'all too. But I recommend setting the dead zone high. So, collective pitch, I would have a high dead zone so you can yaw without adjusting your pitch. Have it set, again, relative control. You set the sensitivity to whatever you want. I still want to be able to adjust my collective by finite amount using only binary input. So, I would set the sensitivity to like 60% or something. But definitely have a high dead zone for that. This one doesn't really matter. In simulator mode, most helicopters don't even have WEP, so that's irrelevant. Roll access, pitch access, basically the same thing. This lets you roll left and right. Pretty self-explanatory. I mean, if you've flown a plane, you know what those do. So then you have roll sensitivity, pitch, yaw sensitivity. If you don't know what these do, I'll quickly demonstrate. Oh wait, I can't because there's no joystick in here. Okay, well basically this this will kind of dampen your input, so it's not as... Actually, I can just show you right here. So if I set it to the roll sensitivity to 9, you can see I'm rolling pretty slowly. It's not because of the helicopter, it's because the pilot is being very soft with the controls, and he's very slowly adjusting it. And if I set it to 100%, you can see it's a little bit more abrupt. These are to show, like, if you could see the joystick wiggling around, but this is a cockpit placeholder, so you won't see that. Alright, now we get to weaponry. You have different kinds of guns. From what I have seen, there's no difference between small caliber and large caliber guns that I know of. But additional guns is something that you will want binded separately. I recommend, at least. You don't have to, but I have right trigger and right button, or right bumper, on my Xbox controller set to, my weaponry and stuff. I also have it set to my mouse too. But additional guns, so some helicopters will have the option to have side-mounted guns, like right, you'll have a gun pod here and here, or maybe here and here. That's what that does. It fires those off if you have any of them. And they are pilot controlled, which means if your gunner dies, you can still control them. And that's important because in most helicopters, especially attack helicopters, the gunner controls the front gun, which is, the giant gun on the underneath. Okay, sorry. The giant gun right here. And if your gunner dies, you cannot control that thing. So sometimes it is a good idea to take in additional guns on the side of your helicopter instead of extra rockets if you think you're going to run into a lot of other aircraft. So yeah, fire machine guns. This one is, again, pretty self-explanatory. That's the gunner's machine guns. But something I should note, the Huey, for whatever reason, has an option to have miniguns and the 40mm grenade launcher at the same time. It has two different miniguns. It has the gun pods, and then it has the controllable, aimable ones. And for whatever reason, I don't know why Gaijin did this, this is the only way to fire them. You cannot fire the miniguns separately from the grenade launcher, which means when you try to use one, you're using both. And it's really dumb because you're firing a 40mm at a heavy tank, and you're firing, miniguns at it too, but if you're trying to shoot at a helicopter, you're still firing the 40 mils at it, even though you're trying to hit it with your miniguns. It's really stupid. You know what I mean if you've flown it. Anyways, now this is personal preference. I wouldn't bind these to what I have because I don't really use it this way. But if you're the kind of person that likes to use the weapon selector, I'd recommend that you want to bind these to something instead. Probably this to RB and this to whatever. But I don't like using weapon selector because I don't have time for that. I want to know what button I need to press to fire what. I don't like having to cycle through stuff to be like, okay, now I can fire this. Eventually things might have to get to that point for me, but for now that's not how I have my control set up. Drop bomb, you don't really need this unless you're using Russian helicopters, and even then, why would you want to take bombs when you can take rockets and ATGMs? But that is an option you can have if you want. I wouldn't recommend it though. Rockets and rocket salvo. These are pretty much on every single helicopter in the game. Not every, but most. There are some helicopters that only have ATGMs. But rockets are available to most helicopters, and in my opinion, are the most fun thing to use. So pretty self-explanatory. You know what rockets are. They're all, from my experience, well, most of them are heat rockets, so you have to get direct hits on enemy vehicles in order to do any damage, or any significant damage. Weapon lock air-to-air, and weapon lock air-to-ground. So, air-to-ground, I don't think this is for anything other than the PARS missiles, I think. For the German Eurocopter, whatever it's called. I don't think this works with Hellfires. I haven't really used the AH-64D with the Hellfires, so I can't tell you if it works with that, but this one is for like Stinger missiles, Sidewinders, a weapon selection mode. Again, that's, if you know what that is, you can use it. I personally don't recommend it though, because if you're in the action, in the heat of the moment, you may not have time to switch weapons. But if you're sitting in the back of the map with ATGMs, you know, maybe you have it. Ripple quantity, again, that's for the weapon selector. That is the one redeeming thing of the weapon selector, I will add, because what that lets you do, it's gonna fire 4 rockets at once. And if I do it again, it'll do 8. Oh, actually no, it'll do it. Okay, so it's kind of like burst fire on. Wait, no. Oh, I'm dumb. I'm really dumb. Okay, there we go. I was pressing the wrong button. So as you can see, it fired 8 there. S means it'll continuously fire as long as you're holding it. But if you want to like quickly shotgun something, you can just look at a tank and go, oh, bye-bye, and then miss it and not kill it. Yeah, that's what the weapon selector does, and you can change how many you want to fire, but I don't like using it. I think it's trash poopy. Okay, laser designator. This one is a setting you probably don't really need to turn on and off, so you could leave it alone if you want, but I'll show you what it does. You do need to have your laser designator on when you're firing missiles, but when you're firing Hellfires and other laser-guided weaponry, but it automatically turns them on when you fire them, as you can see right here. What was the laser button again? So LT, right mouse button. You can see lasers on, it says laser, and that little box shows up. And now if I fire a Hellfire missile, oops. Wait, why? Oh, that's why. It's like, why is it not firing? Okay. You can see now it turns on the laser designator automatically. But yeah, you don't really need to turn it on. But you might want to turn it off though, because after you fire a Hellfire missile, the laser designator stays on. So the reason why this is important is a lot of top-tier tanks, and I think some helicopters, have a laser warning indicator, which means if someone has a laser designator pointing at them, it informs them and says, hey, watch out, someone's pointing a laser at you. So if you want to be a little bit more stealthy, you can turn off your laser designator after firing a Hellfire, but that's really all it does. You do need the laser on to guide Hellfire missiles and other laser-guided weapons. Switch radar on and off. So this one's pretty self-explanatory. If you have a radar on your helicopter, it turns it on. This one, as you can see, does not. It has a, it has this thing, but this isn't radar. That's a radar warning something. I don't know what it's called, but it tells you if someone's pinging you with radar, which I can show you after I restart this because I killed the thing because it was making too many beeps. So change radar mode. I guess I'll hop in the Apache to quickly show this off. But this is only relevant to the Apaches, and I think the K-52. Let me see. Does the K-52 have it? Pretty sure it has. Yeah, okay. K-52 does have a radar. It's nose mounted though. So you can see I do not have the Hellfires yet, so I can't tell you if that stuff works with the AH-64D. What the hell? Why is the radar not working? Hello? Why is... Okay, well, for whatever reason, there's supposed to be a radar there, but it's not showing up. So I can't show you here. I don't know what's going on. Yeah, beats me. I have no clue why the radar's not showing up. But that's basically what the settings do. If you know how, I mean, but you're probably gonna know how that works by the time you get to the AH-64D, anyways. But at the current moment, radar on helicopters doesn't really do anything other than help you identify targets. But that's not really a... I've never really seen anyone use it, and I personally haven't used it, but I also don't fly the AH-64D that much, so. Then you have lock radar target on. This one is kind of helpful because if you're, let's say you have your radar on, and I'm like, I don't see anybody, and then you just say, you press the lock radar target on, it'll be like, oh, and it'll lock your camera, I think, onto the target where the radar is. And then you'd be like, okay, fire a Hellfire. Now, I think the Hellfires in the game at the moment are not radar guided or anything like that. So I don't, because I think I don't really remember what the Apache, I don't know what the Apache's weapon systems are like and how they work exactly, but I think some of the later Hellfires can be guided with radar or something. I don't know. But anyways, that's not implemented in the game. Next thing, switch infrared countermeasures on and off. So this one, for some reason, it's not saying anything, but what that does is if you have a missile approach warning system, that will, let me just make sure it's not like, meant to do P. Okay, yeah, so it just doesn't notify you if you change it, unless this thing can't be turned off, in which case that's kind of dumb. Then you have fire flare series and periodic flare release on and off. So basically, fire flare series, if you hold down the flare button, it'll fire flares out like that. And the way infrared guided missiles and flares have worked has changed. But at the current state, flares are not as OP as they used to be. As in, you can't just shake a missile off by pooping off a flare and, the missile just goes herder and crashes into the ground. Like, you actually have to fire a good amount of flares and make sure that your helicopter is, alright, make sure the flares are in between your helicopter and the missile flying at you. That is, assuming the missile has to be infrared seeking. If it's not, you're fucked. But anyways. So that's infrared countermeasures on and off, right here. Fire flares, again, I would ignore this one. This will just fire one flare off. Have fire flare series bound to something. Instead of fire flares, you want to use this periodic flare release on off. What this does is when you press it, it'll fire a flare off every second or so. You can, when you're at the spawn setting for a match, you can change that option. So basically, like, you press the button and it'll toggle. Like, it's a toggle, it turns the flares on, and they fire... Sorry. It turns off the periodic flare release thing, and they fire off every... Oh, wait, why did it work that time? Flares salving the maw. Okay, that's what this one is. So, flares slaving to maw. What this does, and well, first of all, what the maw is the missile approach warning. And if someone's firing a missile at you, your helicopter is going to make this, like, siren noise. And it'll also fire off flares every, like, second. It'll fire, I don't know exactly how much it is for each helicopter, but that's what it does. What this does is it turns off the flare dispensing. Because previously, if you were flying in this game, like, any missile flying at you would turn this on, and you would run out of flares, because people were always shooting missiles at you. And what this does is allows you to turn it off if you're not in danger, or if you're not being if you know you're not being attacked by infrared missiles, you can turn this off to save flares, because you only have so many of them. So definitely have these three bound to something. Fire air to ground missile. This is like ATGMs, tow missiles. Missile control X-axis and Y-axis. I don't think there's any missiles that use this at the current moment. That I could be wrong. I have not seen them. Rate of fire. So if you have machine guns, this also affects your main cannon. And it has the option to. It'll change the rate of fire. So you can see here, I am... Okay, for some reason it doesn't let me fire there, but... That's basically all it does. It changes how fast it fires. It also changes how fast it overheats. So if you're firing, if you're trying to snipe at someone at a long distance, you may want to lower the fire rate so your gun doesn't overheat. Because if it jams in midair, you have to go back to the airfield to unjam it. So next thing, toggle ballistic computer. So this isn't really, if you're flying in a cockpit, you don't really need to turn this on or off. Actually, in this cockpit, it actually does change the rocket indicator. But in most other helicopter cockpits, it doesn't change it. But you can see when I turn it on, the rocket indicator changes, and it now more accurately displays where it's going to hit. Then you go down to the very last setting, which is toggle sight mode and cockpit. So this one, I'll have to go to the hangar to show you. And this only works for some helicopters, not all, but it works with the Apache very well. In fact, I would say out of all the helicopters, the Apache is probably the best one to use rockets with, because the rocket sight is just so damn accurate on this thing. So you can see here, when I press that, there's the cockpit, the normal, that's not a cockpit, the sight, the normal sight, that's showing where the gun's gonna land. Like, that's where that goes is where your, the round for your cannon's gonna land. But if you change the sight mode, you can see now the circle is different, and it's going to land wherever your rockets land. So here I'm gonna see if I can snipe this SPAA. And it lands pretty close. Like, obviously, it's not perfect, and rockets do have quite a bit of inaccuracy at very long ranges. That's why you want to maybe fire a salvo. You will need that setting if you want to use, if you're playing in sim and you want a long range, I don't know why I didn't do that, just return the hangar. If you want a long range snipe with rockets, you're going to need that setting. So let's go back to the Viper. And that's pretty much it for weaponry. Again, don't know if that missile adjustment thing, this one, I have no clue what that's for. Then you have camera control. Toggle view is you don't really need it, but I think I utilize it quite a bit, but that just toggles your camera view. That's pretty self-explanatory. sight stabilization and destabilization. So this one's actually pretty important to know, and I use it in a couple interesting ways also that may help those of y'all who like to play tank arcade assault. And another thing, so the option for VR HUD or VR HMD aiming, like this thing that we turned off, this works whenever you have your sight stabilizer on. That is what you need to turn on if you want to use the VR aiming with HMD, which I do not recommend you use. This turns on automatically whenever you fire an ATGM. What else? Oh, also it destabilizes once if you press the sight stabilizer again, it destabilizes itself. But one reason why you might want to use the destabilizer is because a lot of times when I'm flying my helicopter, specifically in very action-packed, fast-paced game modes, you can see, look at the camera, or look at the thing on the bottom right. I'm going to press the sight stabilizer, and you can see now in cockpit view, it stabilizes the camera. But if I press it again, it doesn't destabilize it, it just restabilizes it wherever I'm pointing. So if I want to undo that without having to turn my helicopter far away, I can just destabilize the camera. And this is important for a couple reasons. So I'm going to try to lock onto that plane very far away. And if I want to, not track it anymore without having to, manually go into this mode and unstabilize, that's why you want to have that binded, because it lets you do that. And specifically, you cannot fire Hellfire missiles, or sorry. Okay, yeah, that's right. So I should have mentioned this first. So you see this little box right here. This is the range at which you can fire your Hellfire missiles. So if I aim over here, you can see now that box is flashing, and it will not let me fire Hellfire missiles. And you can see even over here, this is the Hellfire missile thingy blinking, meaning I can't fire. So you have to be pointing forward all the way in order to fire the Hellfire missiles. And sometimes, if I'm playing tank arcade assault and I want to fire a Hellfire missile at point blank, which I do quite occasionally. Let's see if I can do it here. I suck at this in not VR, but it helps to be able to restabilize the thing so you can fire Hellfire missiles point blank. And I know you're probably thinking, why the hell would you want to do that? Well, in tank arcade assault, it's just a lot faster to kill stuff if you use your Hellfires like that. Just trust me. I've played it enough to know. So this one's really important, and so is this one. And the reason why I have it bound to my mouse is because if you haven't been able to tell yet, when I'm in this mode, I use my mouse to aim, and I have my left hand on the controller. But when I'm flying like this, I have both hands on my controller for as much as much control of the helicopter as possible. But, if I move my right hand to my mouse, I can still touch both joysticks with my hand. Granted, I have to, claw hand it in a weird way with my right thumb on my right joystick and, the bottom of my index finger on the left joystick. It's a little awkward, but that way lets you control your helicopter and aim at the same time. So, cockpit view, that's pretty self-explanatory. Shooter view and gunner view. Now, what I did is I set the mouse button 4, which is my side mouse button, to both cockpit and shooter view, because in sim, those are the only two modes. Sorry, you have three views in sim. You have this mode, you have the gunner view, which is this one, and you have the ATGM view. So what I did is, so I don't have to toggle between 3 different camera views, I just have it like this. Where I'm in this mode, and then I press it again, but when I'm playing sim, it puts me back in cockpit, not in third person, like that. You can find out how you want to do that, but that's why I did that. Tracking camera, ignore that. Zoom access. This one, yeah, I recommend you have zoom access bound to... Actually, no, set this to none. I forgot about that. Just set that to none. I recommend you have zoom access to mouse wheel up and down. but I also, this is kind of weird, I have RB set as like kind of my camera button too. It's like my weapon button, but also my camera button. Like it lets me move my head left and right. You can see here, well, you can't see it because my head's turning, but you can see it there. Also, when I'm holding down RB, it moves my head, and I'll explain that in a bit. You don't really need that when you're flying a helicopter, but for aircraft, it's pretty useful. View in battle. So I have my D-pad as my viewing camera control because when I'm not in VR, I need a way to control my view, and I use the D-pad for that because I like having joysticks to fly, and there's really no other way to look around unless you use the D-pad or the A, B, X, Y buttons. So yeah, I use D-pad for that, and I recommend if you fly an aircraft with a controller that you do that too. If you fly inverted, you obviously want to turn that on. Same thing for helicopter gunner. Aiming, don't exactly... Oh, that's for... So if you didn't have a mouse, if you only had a controller, you might want to make... aiming X and Y axis one of the joysticks. But the problem is if you do that, you won't be able to control your aircraft. So that's something I'm going to let you decide, but I do not have that bound. I specifically use my mouse for aiming. Mouse wheel helicopter, so this changes what the helicopter does. You can do zoom access, but if I remember correctly, setting this to zoom access makes it where you can't use this. So you see here I have RB plus A and RB plus X to zoom in and out like this. If I set this to zoom access, it won't let me do that. But I can still use mouse wheel because that's what it does. So if you set this to anything, if you set mouse wheel to zoom access, it will disable this thing for whatever reason. Don't know why, but it does. Mouse wheel multiplier, that pretty much sets how much this is affected, how much that affects the movement of the mouse multiplier and shit. Toggle engine, that one turns your engine on and off, which I do not recommend you do in helicopters because there's really there's never a good reason to turn your helicopter's engine off unless you're doing some really freaky stuff. Something that I have never had the opportunity to do, and I have a lot of time in helicopters. But that is something you can do if you really want to. I will say there has been occasions where I was in a helicopter and I was trying to hide from a jet in sim, so I would fly somewhere, turn my engine off, and the jet couldn't find me because he was using his gunner view to get third person and kind of cheat and hear me to find me. But that's like the only time I've ever used it. And again, you can use the multifunction menu for that, so you don't really need to have that bound to something, but I just have it bound. Toggle gear, this is only needed for most of the Russian helicopters, but that is something you can turn on and off. Toggle flaps, I don't know what helicopter has flaps. I don't think there is a helicopter that uses flaps, but the setting's there, so I'm assuming that there is one. Open cockpit, this one's actually really useful, especially in VR, and specifically sim. So you can see, I'm going to fly over here just so you can... It basically allows you to hear things a lot better, and sometimes even reveals some of your blind spots. But as you can see in the Viper, kind of gives you more blind spots. But in the Hueys, it definitely helps out with blind spots. You can see, can't really hear the tank. Now you can hear it, but I'm gonna crash because I'm a dumbass. But yeah, I fly with the cockpit open for every helicopter because one, sounds, things sound a lot cooler, and two, I can hear a lot better, and sometimes my blind spots are not as blinding. Cockpit lighting, this one's just like, turns the light on your cockpit. That's all it does. And you got cockpit sight. Now, this one's not that useful for most helicopters, but for some helicopters like the Huey, where the cockpit sight's very wobbly, like the green thing you're seeing on screen, like that green circle, but it's even more wobbly in the Huey. Sometimes I turn it off because it's distracting, and I just like use the little wire that's in front of the cockpit to aim my missiles. But yeah, that's what turning the cockpit sight does. Turning off the cockpit sight does. So MFD mode that's the multi-function display, and that is these things right here. Most helicopters only have one, but the AH-64D Viper and the KA-52 and basically top tier helicopters have two displays. And MFD mode first, second, third, and zoom. I don't know what third does. You see here it doesn't do anything for the Viper, but MFD mode 1 changes the left screen. That toggles it. And if you're wondering why my camera is doing that, it's because of this. Okay. My controls, again, they're kind of dumb, but I try to make it as to where you can do everything on just an Xbox controller. So some things do multiple things, like resetting the camera. But anyways, this is MFD mode. Just toggles the different camera or different display options. You have this one, which is wait, what? Oh, there we go. So this one is kind of like it's kind of a what the my gosh, I can't speak. It's kind of like the virtual cockpit. Like, you know how when you do this in an airplane and like the little the degree thingy, the like little thing that goes all the way into the sky that says like 30, 40, 50 degrees. That's basically what that is. And then that's your altitude and climbing. That's your speed. That is your compass. I don't really use this screen. I mostly use the map or the radar warning, whatever the fuck it's called. Is it on here? No, I don't see it. But yeah, then you have this one. This is MFD mode 1. No, sorry. This is MFD mode 2nd. And this one changes. This one's mostly the camera, but it also has this one. And the camera is only on the right one. So if you want a camera, you have to have it on the right one. You can see if I turn no camera on, this one is still only those options. That's obviously your map, which I do not believe you can adjust. Yeah, no, you can't. So then this one is your different camera options. And you can have 3 different zooms. NVD mode, night vision on and off. I wouldn't recommend turning this on during the day, or even on some night maps. Changing mode of the thermal sight, that is basically white is hot or black is hot. So that's LBD pad down. Wait, what? Yeah, why is it not? Oh, that's why. Okay. It only works in ATGM view. But yeah, you can see black is hot, and then white's hot. If you're using VR, I do not recommend using white as hot because it will blind the fuck out of you. But it is easier to spot targets with black as hot, from what I've noticed. Just because black stands out a lot more than white sometimes, but it's really your personal preference. Request location of allies. Now this one is very important in Sim. And I guess RB? Either way, it's a very important thing to have, especially in Sim. And if you don't know what, if you don't know what tanks are friendly, which ones are not, which I won't lie is pretty, like, if you don't know what a Russian tank looks like, then you probably should get your eyes checked. But if you're looking at a vehicle, can press, I don't think it's going to show up here. Yeah, no, I don't think it is. Maybe if I went to Sim, but basically if you're looking at something, it does the same thing as the ground vehicles do. Request location of, actually I don't even think that's an option here. I think it's just default set to the rangefinder. But anyways, it does what the rangefinder does when you're looking at a friendly tank. It says requesting location of allies, and then it tells you after like 3 seconds of looking at it if it's a friendly or not. So if you're having a hard time telling if a target is friendly or not in Sim, use this while you're looking at it. And then last but not least, we get to trimming. If you don't know what trimming is, if you don't have auto trim on, if you're on manual control, trimming allows you to adjust the helicopter's it's like trimming on an aircraft. You basically set the rudder and the collective and the yaw so that it wobbles around less, I guess, or it flies straight without being. This is more useful on the Huey, but yeah. Anyways, that is all the controls, or at least most of them. So probably notice I was able to move my head around in the cockpit of this thing, but you didn't see a setting for that. I'm gonna turn the engine off just so it's quiet. You can see here, I'm able to move my head around in the cockpit without using VR, of course. And the way you do this is you go to Controls, and set the controls up in aircraft, not helicopter. Go to Camera Controls, and you go to Head Movement, Forward, Backward, Upward, Downward, Left, Right. To simplify this, I set forward and backward to the same thing, and left and right. So basically, when I'm holding down RB, if I press D-pad up, it moves my head upward, and it also tilts my head. It moves my head upward and forward. So this allows me to, specifically when I'm in a airplane, not really so much in a helicopter, it allows me to see over the nose of my helicopter or nose of my aircraft a little bit better. If I do down, it moves my head backwards and downwards. This makes it a little bit easier to see, my controls or my dials or whatever. Not really that useful. If I do left and right, like holding down RB and pressing left or right, it moves my head left or it moves my head right. And this kind of lets you see behind you a bit better. As you can see, I'm not able to see those houses, but if I move my head a little bit to the right, I can see that house. Is there anything in here that's useful? I would recommend setting your multifunction menu to something if you don't want a complicated control scheme like me. Lock target. I would set lock target to whatever lock target you have for your radar, which is this one. And I also have it set to sight stabilization. I have them all bound to the same thing because they roughly all do the same thing anyways. What else? Set target for squadron. One really useful thing about helicopters is they're like one of the best spotting vehicles because you can see the whole map. So I would recommend using this to spot a target on the map, and then once you see where your yellow dot is on the map, call it out for the rest of your team, and you can help out your team quite a bit by using that. That's really it. If you're using VR, make sure you have reset tracking position set to something. From my knowledge, I haven't seen these settings do anything. Turning them on and off, I haven't seen any difference. But maybe Gaijin made to where there is a difference now? I don't know. But anyways, that's the controls for helicopters. Oh, that was really long. And I will make some videos on not only specific helicopters, but how to generally use helicopters in the various game modes. Some tips and tricks that I use, and I guess now I'll go over my control scheme. So, if you're at this part of the video and you want to know how I have my controls set up, obviously you can pause the video and set things to how you want. I'll go to all the, I'll open up all the axis settings so you can look at everything and set it exactly how you want. So, we'll start with collective pitch. I have my left joystick set to pitch and yaw. Now, because my controller was giving me, it was being effed up and it was putting in too much input or too little input. Like, I was putting in too much positive or negative input, causing the collective to jump to 0% in an instant. I set it to binary input and not relative because it would go to anyways, just you don't have to do this part. Instead, you can just do left stick or left thumb vertical. or you can just do left stick up, left stick down. But you want relative control. You know, do all those settings, and then you want the horizontal left stick to be yaw. This one you do not want relative control. You can pretty much leave everything alone here, but make sure that the multiplier is 1, and because I think the multiplier is 0.2 by default, but I could be wrong. Same thing with roll and pitch access, except for roll and pitch, you're going to want to mount these to the thumb. Rolling is left and right, pitching is forward and backward, so I would do right thumb horizontal for rolling, and right thumb vertical for pitch axis. And for this one, I did invert access. You can do, there is a setting somewhere that was invert access for helicopter. Oh, here we go, yeah. That says camera control, so okay, well, anyways, I have it inverted. Whatever you're comfortable with, do that. Weaponry, so the way I have my controller set up is right trigger is specifically for weaponry, and right bumper is my camera control, but because I needed another button to fire additional guns, I set it to RB also. In my aircraft, I have it specifically as, I have it specifically set to RB, just my cameras and nothing else. But you can see here with my trigger, I made it to where, shit. I basically made the trigger like the helicopter, like it is with the helicopters, where I set the multiplier to 0.75 and the correction to 15%. This makes it to where, and if you didn't know this, if you lightly press the trigger for this setting, if you have the setting set to a trigger, and you lightly press it, it only fires your small caliber guns. But if you press it down all the way, it fires your heavier machine guns. And I basically made it to where I increased the gap between pressing it, so I had to really hold it all the way down to fire my heavier guns. But for helicopters, you only have one gun, so, you know, that's why I had to set a separate thing for additional guns. Anyways, secondary weapon, again, I don't use that shit. Bombs, you can really just ignore those, but I have them set to B. I use LT, so I should probably have said this earlier. I use LT and LB as modifier buttons. So what that means is they don't do anything by themselves, but what they do is they're combo buttons. I hold them and then press, like you can see here, if I press B, it just drops a bomb. But if I press LT and B, it continuously drops bombs as long as I'm holding both of those buttons down. And the same thing for rockets. Rockets for me are X and LT plus X. Now, I will say you could probably get away without using RB as your camera control button, but I recommend using it if you're not using VR. If you are using VR, you really do not need to use RB as a camera controller. You really don't. But if you are not using VR, I recommend that you have a way to control your camera, or have a button that lets you control your camera a little bit more. Secondary weapon, weapon lock, again, modifier button LB plus X. And then you can see down here, pressing LB and LT and pressing X fires the missile. You can ignore this one. If you don't know, mouse button 4 and 5 are the side buttons for my mouse. I have a mouse with 5 buttons: left mouse button, right mouse button, middle mouse button, mouse button 4, and mouse button 5. And hold on, I'm going to stop the recording and start real quick. Okay. So mouse button 4 and 5 are my side buttons, if you did not know, or if you wanted to know. Weapon lock, air to ground again. I don't know if that does anything. Exit weapon selected mode. That's if you're using the weapon selector. You find out how you want to have that set up, if that is what you want to do. Ripple quantity, if you have weapon selector on, this is the one redeeming thing about it. If you do want to use weapon selector, you can fire like 8 rockets instantly. But I don't really recommend it, because if they're gonna all kind of land in the same place, and there's never really a moment where firing rockets at the, I mean, it's up to you. You can, if that's how you want to fly helicopters, that's your thing. Laser designator, I have it set to LT plus A, but I don't really use the laser designator on my controller because I'm using my mouse, so I use LT plus right mouse button instead. Which also fire machine guns and large caliber guns I have set to left mouse button so that I can shoot my gun in mouse view. I would probably have rockets set to something. What does right mouse button do? Oh yeah, that's weapon lock. So where are we at now? Laser designator. Okay, switch radar on and off. I have start button as my radar control, but you can also use the multifunction menu to modify your radar, but I like having start as my radar control. And if you really quickly want to see my common controls, because these are actually kind of important to have, I have my map is I hold down LT back, LT back. I left trigger, left bumper, select, or I guess back button, and start button. Those are my 4 modifier buttons. And RB is sometimes my camera button, but not always. So yeah, you can see everything here. These are really the most important ones. You're going to need to be able to access the maps, statistics, multifunction menu, lock target. You want to set that to A button and mouse button 5. You don't have to do this one, but I did it. I've never used it. Set target for squadron. Set this to wherever you want, but I have it set to LB plus back button. And the philosophy of my control scheme is I want to be able to do most everything with one hand. So if I have button combinations I need to press for things I need to be doing frequently, I want to make sure I can do them with just my left hand. And that's why I have most of my modifier buttons on the left side of my controller. So now we go back here. Now radar mode, I don't remember what that does, but search mode, that's I think how fast it scans targets. It basically narrows down the range, or it narrows the angle at which it's scanning targets. Scale, that's how far it scans. So sometimes it'll scan really far away, sometimes it won't. Radar lock on, so if there's a target on your radar and you press that, it'll lock onto it. And I think that's what you use the... actually, no, I think you just press it again and it just toggles different locks, different things to lock onto. Switch infrared countermeasures on and off. Oh, and I have lock radar target on and select. So select, that is... okay, now I remember. So select, that highlights the target, and when you lock onto it, that snaps to the locked on target, I think. I believe that's what it does. Infrared countermeasure on and off. I would have that... I have my infrared count. I have my countermeasures set to right stick. Don't really know why I picked right stick, but yeah, my countermeasures right stick, and the different countermeasure settings are LT, LB plus right stick. Air-to-air missiles, I guess I picked X because X buttons rockets and air to missiles are kind of like rockets, and air to ground missiles I'm like, well, I use bombs for ground, so I might as well have the B button also be air to ground missiles too. You don't have to do it that way, but that was my philosophy with it. But I primarily use this to fire my missiles. I hold down LT and I press my side mouse button to fire a missile. But when I'm playing Tank Arcade and I want to do that Hellfire thing where I like fly right up to the top of the tank, like 5 feet from it, and launch a Hellfire point blank, like that's why I have it set to controller also. Rate of fire, that one is pretty useful. I have RB is again sometimes not my camera controller, but it's not. I rarely press this thing, so it doesn't matter if it's RB to me. Ballistic computer is pretty important if you're using virtual camera or if you have a HUD that uses ballistic computer like the AH-1Z or the Ka-50. Sight mode and cockpit, For helicopter cockpit sights that, like the Apache and the AH-1F and the AH-1S and the Mi-24s, this is very useful. This lets you toggle between your gun and your rocket sight, like I said earlier. But I have it set to my D-pads, LT plus D-pad up and left. In fact, most of my D-pad buttons are to like activate miscellaneous things like this, and toggle gear also. When it comes to like cockpit stuff, it's LT plus D-pad or sometimes LT plus LB. Um, LB is usually more mechanical stuff like gear and flaps, although I haven't used flaps at all. I have back button as my trimming button. That's what I use to trim my aircraft. Start button's my MFD mode also. It's not just my radar thing. What else? So specifically when it comes to the mouse, I guess I should briefly touch up on how I use the mouse. Again, when I go to ATGM view, I use left mouse button primarily for using cannons. Right mouse button is also my lock-on button, although I don't really know if that does much. My stabilizer button is mouse button 4, or no, mouse button 5. And mouse button 4 by itself is just switching to ATGM view, but I have LT plus mouse button 4 air-to-ground missiles. Anyway, this is probably all confusing to you, but you've seen all my controls. If you want to take a look at my other controls, wait, I should probably, is there anything else I need to go over here? Okay. Do this, I guess. So this is how I have my zoom access set up. Want to take a look at that. View in battle. This is how I have my view in battle set up. I think it's the same for y-axis. And whenever I want to reset my camera, I have it set to LB plus RB. That way, if like I'm looking somewhere and I need to look forward immediately, I can just press those two buttons and my camera's pointing straight forward at the default zoom. So that is something I would recommend you have. Again, here's the fire machine gun thing. For helicopters, it's not really that important. I already showed you those. Let me go to the aircraft setting real quick so you can see the head movement if you're interested in that. Again, same thing, LB, RB, resets the camera. That's head movement left, right. That pretty much covers everything. If you have any other questions, you can let me know. I will, again, make a tutorial on... Oh, don't forget, save your controls. And if you don't want to have to do this every game where you turn these off, if that is something that happens to you, I'd recommend you save the controls, and whenever you boot the game up, just import the controls like this, and you won't have to do that. That's pretty much it. So I hope y'all learn to love flying helicopters like I do, and not use ATGMs, because real men use rockets and guns, and y'all have a good one.